There is a stretch of Lakeshore Boulevard West, where on a clear summer evening you can park your car, walk down to the water, and watch the sun go down over Lake Ontario. There is the Gardiner Expressway directly above you. But what you don't know is that you are standing directly above a ruin. You just can't see the rubble below. Because for 3 decades, the place where you are parked, the road you drove in on, the expressway blocking your view of the sky, all of it, was something else entirely. Something that, if you had stood in the same spot in 1935, would have hit you the moment you stepped out of your streetcar. The smell of popcorn and lake air, the sound of a pipe organ carried on the wind, the distant screams of people cresting the top of a roller coaster and stretching in every direction, as far as you could see, the glittering, absurd, magnificent sprawl of Sunnyside Amusement Park. This is the story of the Waterfront Toronto destroyed to build a road to nowhere. To understand Sunnyside, you have to go back to a city that barely resembles the one we know today. At the turn of the 20th century, the western waterfront of Toronto was not a park. It was not a highway. It was a swamp. The Humber River emptied into the lake at what is now the foot of Ellis Avenue, and the land between the river mouth and the older residential streets of the Parkdale neighborhood was low, marshy, and largely useless. A patchwork of mudflats, industrial waste, and shallow water that flooded with depressing regularity and smelled, in summer, the way shallow, stagnant water always smells. The city wanted it gone. The solution, as it so often was in the early 20th century, was to simply make more land. The Toronto Harbour Commission embarked on one of the largest lake-filling operations in the city's history, dredging sand from the lake bottom and depositing it along the western shoreline, pushing the water back and creating from nothing a long, flat strip of new real estate between the old shore and the new waterline. By the time they were finished, they had added roughly 70 acres of land to the city. The question then became, what do you do with it? The answer, arrived at sometime around 1920, was extraordinary in its ambition. You build a playground, not a playground for the wealthy, not a private club or a resort for the people who could afford the ferry to the island, but a public pleasure ground, open to every working family in the city, free or nearly free to enter, built on land that had been lake bottom a decade earlier, right on the water's edge. Sunnyside Amusement Park opened in 1922. What grew along that manufactured shoreline over the next decade was something Toronto has never quite managed to replicate. There was the Flyer, a roller coaster whose first drop sent riders plunging toward the lake. There was the Derby Racer, there was the Sea Breeze, and the Whip, and the Carousel with hand-carved horses, and a Wurlitzer organ whose music carried clear across the water on calm days. There were dance halls. There were restaurants selling hot dogs and cotton candy and cold drinks to people who had taken the King Street car from as far east as Broadview, packed in like sardines. Children pressed against the windows for the first glimpse of the lake. And then there was the Sunnyside Bathing Pavilion. Built in 1922 at a cost that would have seemed outrageous to the aldermen who approved it. The bathing pavilion was a colonnaded Italianate structure, stretching nearly 200 meters along the waterfront. It housed changing rooms for thousands of swimmers at a time. It had showers and lockers and a cafe and a terrace where you could sit and watch the swimmers in the outdoor tank below. And the tank, officially the Sunnyside Outdoor Swimming Tank, later known as the Gus Ryder Pool, was at its peak the largest outdoor swimming pool in the world. It held enough water for 3,500 people to swim at once. And on a hot August weekend, it seemed like most of them showed up. This was not a luxury for the Toronto working class. It was a necessity. In the 1920s and 1930s, the families who filled Sunnyside on summer weekends did not have air conditioning. They did not have cottages on Georgian Bay. Many of them lived in the dense, hot brick row houses of Parkdale and Roncesvalles and the Junction. And on a 35-degree Saturday in July, Sunnyside was the only relief available to them. The streetcar fare was a nickel. The park entrance was free. The water was cold, and the lake was enormous. And for a few hours every week, a working family from Dufferin Street could stand on the shore and feel the wind come off the water, and feel, briefly, like the city belonged to them. It was more than just an amusement park. It was the democratic waterfront. Through the Depression, Sunnyside kept running. The rides were cheap, The pool was open when everything else in the city felt like it was contracting. Jobs disappearing, money evaporating, the future suddenly very uncertain. Sunnyside remained. It was one of the few places in Toronto where poverty was not immediately visible on your face, where the cost of admission was low enough that almost anyone could afford to belong for an afternoon. The photographs from that era showed enormous, joyful crowds. Thousands of people in bathing suits, children running, couples dancing in the open-air pavilions. The midway lit up after dark like a small constellation that had landed on the lakeshore. But no boom lasts forever, and nothing in Toronto's 20th century ended quite as abruptly as the age of Sunnyside. The force that killed it did not arrive all at once. It arrived slowly, the way most catastrophes do, dressed up in the language of progress and modernity and the unargued assumption that the future belonged to the automobile. By the late 1940s, car ownership in Toronto was accelerating at a rate that the road network could not absorb. The city's older arterial streets, King, Queen, Dundas, were not designed for the volume of traffic that post-war prosperity was generating. The answer, being worked out simultaneously in cities across North America, was the expressway. Wide, fast, grade-separated. A road that existed outside the ordinary flow of city life, but cars could travel at speed without the interruption of intersections, streetcars, pedestrians, or the accumulated urban complexity of the built city. And where would you put it? In Toronto's case, the answer was obvious to the planners. Along the waterfront. The lake-filled land along Lakeshore Boulevard was flat, relatively unencumbered by existing buildings, and already functioning as a major traffic corridor. Running an expressway along the lake would be comparatively simple. It would solve the city's growing traffic problem. It would open up the western suburbs to commuters from the downtown core. The fact that the land was already occupied, not by buildings or businesses that might require expensive buyouts, but by a public park, a beloved amusement ground, a place that belonged in the most literal possible sense to the people of the city, did not weigh heavily in the calculations. In 1954, the Metropolitan Toronto government approved the construction of the Frederick G. Gardiner Expressway. The demolition of Sunnyside began almost immediately. The flyer came down, the derby racer came down, the dance halls, the midway, the cotton candy stands, the carousel with the hand-carved horses. All of it came down. The amusement park that had stood for 30 years, that had given 3 decades of summer weekends to the working families of the city, was cleared in a matter of months. The land beneath it was regraded for the expressway. The concrete pillars went in. The elevated roadway rose above the waterfront, and, in doing so, effectively ended the relationship between the city and the lake. The bathing pavilion they could not quite bring themselves to demolish. It is still there. You can see it from the Gardiner. A flash of white Italianate colonnades, briefly visible between the pillars, almost entirely disconnected from the road above it and from the park that once surrounded it. The Gus Ryder pool still operates. In summer, it is still full. But the thing it was part of, the system of pleasure and community and democratic access to the waterfront that Sunnyside represented, that is gone. What replaced it is a 12-lane arterial corridor that separates the city from the lake, as effectively as a wall. You can stand on the north side of Lakeshore Boulevard and look south and see the water. The distance between you and the lake is perhaps 300 meters. Getting there requires crossing lanes of traffic moving at expressway speeds, walking under or over the Gardiner structure, and navigating a park that feels, in the shadow of the expressway, like something left over. The people who built Sunnyside understood something that the post-war planners forgot, or ignored, or never believed in the first place. That access to the waterfront is not a luxury. That the ability of ordinary working people to stand at the edge of the lake and feel the wind and let their children run toward the water, that this is not a secondary concern of urban design, something to be traded away when something more important comes along. It is, in fact, the whole point. Toronto spent 30 years building a place where that was possible, and 1 decade erasing it. The Gardiner Expressway that replaced it has been the subject of debate, study, and controversy for as long as it has existed. There have been proposals to bury it, to tear it down, to rebuild it further from the lake. The conversation is ongoing and expensive, and inconclusive in that particular way that Toronto's large infrastructure debates tend to be. The expressway is old now. It is deteriorating. The cost of maintaining it climbs every year, and every summer, the Gus Rider pool fills with swimmers. The bathing pavilion stands in the shadow of the elevated road. The lake is right there, close enough to smell the cold water on a warm day, and the city is still, 70 years later, trying to figure out how to get back to it. Some cities build toward their waterfronts. They treat the edge between the land and the water as the most valuable, most democratic, most irreplaceable real estate they have. They protect it fiercely. They open it to the public. They understand instinctively that the moment you give it to the car, you have given it away forever. Toronto gave it to the car. The roller coasters are gone. The carousel music is gone. The sound of 3,500 people in the water at once, that particular roar of collective joy on a summer afternoon, is gone. In its place, there is the sound of traffic, the sound of the expressway, the sound of the city driving at speed past the edge of the lake with somewhere else to be. If you like this type of content and would like to learn more about the environment that surrounds us, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to this channel. Stay tuned for more.